Hi, I'm Gillian Clowes, Senior Cyber Underwriter with Allianz Commercial. Today we're diving deep into the world of cyber risk with Tresa Stephens, our Regional Head of Cyber at Allianz Commercial. Tresa, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Gillian. I'm excited to dive into the latest report and the latest trends in cyber.
Great, let's get started. First, the report highlighted a 14% year-over-year increase in the frequency and a 17% increase in the value of large cyber claims in the first half of 2024. What's driving this surge?
So we are still seeing ransomware incidents. That hasn't gone away. But this year, one of the trends that we've noticed is that there has also been a rise in non-attack data breach related events, as well as attacks on digital supply chains.
So the report highlights a rise in non-attack data privacy claims. Could you explain this and why is it particularly relevant in the United States?
Organizations are collecting more information on their customers than they ever have before. And there's been an increased focus on consumer privacy rights, not just from those individual consumers, but also from the regulators. Particularly in the United States, the regulations are a bit more open to interpretation than they might be in some of the ex-US territories, the EU with GDPR. And so there are some hungry plaintiffs' attorneys that are exploiting this sort of gap or this gray area in some of the legislation, which is leading to an uptick in class action related events here in the United States.
So another trend you mentioned is how cyber criminals are exploiting interconnectivity and supply chains. Could you elaborate on this vulnerability?
So threat actors are attracted to large repositories of data. They can exploit them for the biggest payday. And businesses are relying on third parties, particularly cloud-hosted software solutions, more than they ever have before. And so it's created this sort of confluence, this aggregation of data, if you will, with lots of parties relying on the same vendors in the cloud. And so these cloud-based service providers have become very, very attractive targets for threat actors.
Right. And then moving into AI, how is it impacting the cybersecurity landscape? Would you say it's more of a threat or an opportunity?
It's an interesting way to phrase that question, actually, because AI really is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's become a very critical tool for organizations to protect and defend themselves. It's really great for pattern recognition and things like, identifying weaknesses in your network and/or, identifying anomalous behavior. But on the other hand, it's also made it much easier for threat actors to propagate more efficient malware, mass, phishing and vishing campaigns that are much more convincing than they might have been historically. So it's sort of created this landscape where customers, organizations really have to sort of fight fire with fire and use these same tools to sort of protect themselves that these threat actors are using against them.
With these rising threats, what practical steps should businesses take to strengthen their cyber hygiene?
Cyber hygiene is the most important thing. We say it year after year, that's the tried and true, but ultimately, has an organization, dusted off their incident response plan in a while? Have they conducted a tabletop? Have they run through sort of an attack simulation to see how prepared they would be and sort of who would be responsible for what in the event of that worst case scenario? And because we're talking about supply chains this year, it's also critical for businesses to understand sort of those third-party suppliers they rely on. Do they have the same security posture that the insured has, or even better, right? Ideally. And so there's that increased focus on just kind of preparing for that worst outcome.
Right. Thank you, Tresa, for sharing these insights. Before we wrap up, could you tell us about how Allianz Commercial is supporting clients in this complex landscape?
I'm really glad you asked. I think it's important for businesses to understand that they're not in it alone. It's very challenging at this point in time. There's sort of a dearth of security professionals who can help them. It's hard to go out and hire some of these folks, right? Because we're sort of seeing that lack of the skilled workforce right now. But they shouldn't feel like it's just on them to do this. Gone are the days of a cyber product just being about traditional risk transfer. You should rely on your carriers like Allianz, who have relationships with best-in-class vendors, whether it's legal counsel, forensics firms, tech service providers, risk consultants. We have a bench that can help you sort of assess your exposure and help you prepare to mitigate that risk. I hope that companies don't feel like they're in it alone. They can call Allianz for that.
That's fantastic. It's clear that with the right strategies and support, businesses can better navigate the complexities of cyber risks. So thank you again, Tresa, for sharing these important insights.
Thanks for having me.